Hi, good morning everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar on Transparency and Accountability in Practice, where we're going to launch WING's new toolkit on the topic. And Julia, can I move my presentation, please? Oh, thank you. So before we start, I'm Ana Pinho. I'm WING's Knowledge Management Coordinator, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. So if you have any problems or questions, you can send me a message or WING's office. That's on the host here. And I must say before we start that you are being recorded, and the presentation will be on WING's YouTube channel later. And about using WebEx, and if you lose your connection, don't panic. You can just reconnect using the link we mailed you. And if you have problems listening to us or speaking, you can go to audio on the top left-hand side of the menu and adjust the settings. And you'll all be muted automatically to avoid background noise. So if you want to make a point during the webinar, you can raise your hand, as stated here, or you can write a question on our chat. So here with us today, we have 4 presenters, and we thank them for joining us today. We have Carolina Suarez from AFE in Colombia. She's also WING's board member and was part of the working group that set up and helped us write the toolkit. We have John Harvey, who's a philanthropy consultant, and he helped us write the toolkit with Neville Gabriel. And also, he'll be presenting the toolkit itself. And we have here with us also Iara Rolnik from GIFE, and she'll be talking a little bit about their initiatives that are featured on the toolkit on transparency. And Natasha Ibbotson from the EFC will be talking about their work on that, and the EFC is featured on the toolkit as well, and the idea for the toolkit it started with their principles on transparency and accountability. So I'll pass the microphone to Carolina.
At WING's producing this toolkit that brings practical concepts and real-life examples that will guide us in order to achieve transparency and accountability practice. Also, thank you to Iara and Natasha. As you said, they represent GIFE in Brazil and the European Foundation Center, two institutions leaders in this issue that guide us today, transparency and accountability in foundations. Do you have my presentation there, Anna?
And we do. We're just putting it up right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
And giving you presenting powers so you can move it.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I thank you to all of you. Okay, great. So now, okay, great. No, okay, great. Just to tell you a little bit about WINGS. WINGS is the only global network of almost 90 grantmaker associations and philanthropy support organizations in over 30 countries. And our mission at WINGS is to strengthen, promote, and provide leadership on the development of philanthropy and private social investment around the world. The AFE, the Association of Corporate and Family Foundations, it was created in 2008, and we have 57 family and corporate foundations. At AFE, we encourage the coordination, cooperation, personal innovation, and sharing of good practice among our foundations, acting always with transparency in order to achieve greater impact in their interventions and contribute to social equity and sustainable development in Colombia. So one of our central axes is promoting transparency and accountability. We are convinced that as leader foundations in our country, we need to be referral of transparency and accountability. Transparency, we always ask why transparency and accountability, and we say that transparency goes to be just a trend. It is a must, and as we know, it's widely acknowledged to be transparent. In 2008, just to remember some issues, the European Foundation Center and the Council of Foundations created a joint working group, and they developed a set of principles of accountability for international transparency. 5 years later, in 2012, following the recommendations from the Global Philanthropy Leadership Initiative, WINGS initiate a global consultation with the aim of deepening the understanding and practice of international philanthropy accountability. So we start to do some regional meetings in Cairo, in Johannesburg, and Bogota. These meetings brought together more than 100 participants and produced valuable information on the obstacles to good practice, while also suggesting practical steps and recommendations. Barry Smith, John Harvey, and Neville Gabriel, they are the three consultants engaged in the process to facilitate the meetings, systemize the learnings, and produce this online resource. We created a task force at WINGS with some WINGS members to evaluate and follow up the work done, as well as provide the toolkit. So the toolkit will be presented by John. And so what can be achieved with an adequate transparency and accountability? It's always the question that we have. We know that the toolkit is not the final word on transparency and accountability. It's an ongoing process. And in WINGS, we will continue organizing meetings and add it to the toolkit. But when we start with the principle, with one of the Istanbul principles regarding corporate social organization development effectiveness. And one of them said that civil society organizations are effective as development actors when they demonstrate and sustain organizational commitment to transparency, multiple accountability, and integrity in their internal operations. So we said at AFE that as non-profit organizations, we belong to the society. Civil society organizations belong to the society, and our resources, which may well originate from private funds, when transferred to the non-profit organization, automatically become public assets. This is precisely why the tax legislation is acknowledging this public nature offered as a tax regime. We are convinced that only when we can self-regulate it, we will be able to demonstrate great impact and will be able to completely fulfill our mission objectives. As you say there, either we regulate ourselves or regulations will be imposed upon us. So I just will focus what is happening here in Colombia right now. In the middle of a universe of non-profit organizations that is complex and diverse. First, just to tell you that the number of non-profit organizations in Colombia is unfortunately unknown. Some estimate that we have approximately 100,000, but only are actually fulfilling their duties. In Bogota, the capital of Colombia, just as an example, there are more than 47,000 registered non-profit organizations, but only 13,000 are active. In Colombia, we are having a debate on a new tax law, and they are looking to impose more control and fewer tax benefits to non-profit organizations. Some sectors of the society and from the government are not aware of the activities of the non-profit organizations due to the lack of transparency and self-regulation from these entities. Okay, here, sorry. So we are constantly accused of lacking transparency, frequently witness of cases in which some entities called foundations use their name to ensure mismanagement of public funds or to evade or defeat any tax. Different Colombian officials, such as the finance minister, the Colombian National Tax and Customs Agency, the Secretary of Transparency, declare permanently that behind corruption there is almost always a foundation, as you see in these graphics and just some news from the papers, the latest news from the papers. So we are aware that the change should begin with and from us. So what we are doing right now in Colombia, we are working in self-regulation and transparency, and we know that there must be tools that help us to demonstrate the impact of our results and change, and we decided to do seriously. In Colombia, and also in other parts of the world, the initiatives for the promotion of transparency and accountability are not new, are mostly varied by, and here in Colombia, the Confederation of NGOs and other organizations are doing other initiatives. But the last year, we decided to start a pilot project with 7 of our member foundations and Fundación DIS. You can see there the foundations that are working this pilot, and the AFE, Fundación Bolívar da Vivienda, Compartamos con Colombia, Viviendo por Colombia, Fundación Luque, Santo Domingo, Promigas, Aldarra Concha, all of them AFE members, and Fundación DIS. So we started this pilot and with the following objectives. First, to identify an appropriate and viable methods for measuring transparency and accountability, and also to define a scaling plan in order to share the information with different stakeholders. So we just want to summarize in 4 words why being transparent. First, legitimacy, sector extraction, protection, and trust. First, legitimacy. We know that we manage private funds with public purposes, so accountability is an obligation, and we know that. We are coherent with our social objectives, and we need to be transparent, and we should to improve our relationship with our targeted audience, and we only achieve that being transparent. Strengthening the sector. We want that the third sector grows and have great credibility. We are interested in developing relationships, sharing experiences and learning. We want to promote a community that shares best practices, and we want to see ourselves as the strongest sector, establish our impact as a group in terms of the country development, and continue growing in articulate manner. Protection. In terms of protection, we want to move forward and have access to differentiation tools to self-regulate in order to distance ourselves from organizations that take advantage of the lack of control. Going through this process separates us from this organization that exists, yes, and that they don't have true social interest. And the last, and also important, we want to be seen as an organization that work professionally and reach their goals. We want to consolidate the third sector in Colombia, the foundation sector, as clean and well managed. And we perform accountability exercises in order to generate trust in the community, our donors, the government, and cooperation organs. So, having these terms, we wanted to make a simple, evolutionary, friendly, comprehensive, useful, and universal comparable pilot. So we make an analysis, and we identified 8 essential aspects, as you say there in the slide. Identification and context, so the user can register and update all the information that allows interest groups to understand the organization and find it and establish contact with the organization. Second, purpose, so anyone can review the organization's reasons for being, its main objective and vision of the future. Third, action. In this section, the organization describes the lines of work and programs developed by the organizations in order to achieve its objectives. Fourth, government and control. So you can find there relevant information that is registered with the government and control entities, guaranteeing proper operations and good practices. 5, policies. The major policies of organizations that are code of ethics, hiring, investment, finance, and other policies that organizations can have. Finances, information on the foundation investment, operating expenses, and mission expenses are requested, as well as the disclosure of financial statements. You can post a PDF with your financial statements as PDF file. Staff and volunteering, we also consider that it's important to know who is working with the organization. And finally, disclosure and measurement, so that here the organization can ask questions regarding the methods used by the organization to present its results and indicating how the organization operates. So these are the minimum standards what we choose for our pilot. And now we have an online form with 67 questions. More than 50 organizations have tested the form. And we expect that on May, we will launch this pilot as a public tool in order to be used by all foundations in Colombia through the web www.fundacionestransparentes.org. It means in English, transparentfoundation.org. So we expect to launch it on May. And the idea is that voluntarily each foundation will be able to fulfill the questionnaire as accountability practice, and the government and other stakeholders will have access to the information published in the web. So it doesn't matter what we are doing, because you will see what is the foundation is doing in this web. And also, we are thinking to have an external certification. So we are having conversations with Deloitte and the Colombian, the Transparency Chapter in Colombia, International Transparency Chapter in Colombia. They have showed interest in supporting this certification. So the entity can just fulfill the questionnaire, but also can have access to that external certification. And it will help also the government to know who is behind the organization, what is the organization doing to improve and to enhance transparency and accountability. Because we just want to summarize. Transparency and accountability should be a priority on the agendas of civil society organizations, and it's one of the reasons because we support this toolkit, and because we know that this toolkit will be improved every day by all our WINGS members. So it's just to tell you a little bit what we are doing in Colombia and why we are supporting this toolkit for WINGS.
And thank you very much, Carolina, and for introducing the toolkit and for giving us this great overview about what's happening in Colombia. It's really interesting to see government officials saying that foundations are responsible for corruption and how transparency can help with that, and if the foundations are more transparent. I'll pass it now to John Harvey, who will walk us through the toolkit itself and help us understand how it was done and what we can do with it and how it can be used. And John?
Great. Thank you, Anna. I just want to acknowledge once more Neville Gabriel. He and I were tasked with going through all of the wonderful information that had been gathered in the process that WINGS had undertaken, a range of consultations, gathering of quite useful information, as well as the very good work that some WINGS members had already done, including grant make associations in East Africa, North America, Europe, and elsewhere. There was quite a lot of rich material for us to work with. And so we had the task of distilling all of that and putting it together in a way that we felt could be most useful to WINGS members. For some reason, I'm trying to advance the slide, but it's not working for me, Anna. Are you sure that I have
Hi, John.
control?
You do, but if you
can't,
I see.
You might have to. Yeah, okay, I'm good. Yeah,
okay.
There we go. So first, let me just give you a general overview of the content of the toolkit. Of course, the beginning of the toolkit offers a preface from WINGS and an introduction, including the objectives and how the toolkit was developed, just to give some context to the work. We then wanted to spend a bit of time on the understanding transparency and accountability, and I will go through this a little bit more further along in the presentation. So let me move on to the next one. We also felt it was very important for WINGS members to have at their disposal a very strong case for why transparency and accountability matter. We know that I think most of us on the call would agree that these are values that in and of themselves are important and ought to be nurtured. But what is the business case? What is the economic case? What is the political case for these kinds of things? We wanted to make a very, very strong case so that WINGS members could go back to their own members and make the case to them. So this particular section looks at to whom philanthropy and private social investment are accountable, that is to say stakeholders, and I'll go over this a little bit. Reasons why transparency and accountability is important, and we also wanted to spend a little time debunking what maybe some of the myths around this are. Then we get to the main section of the toolkit, and this is where we lay out what Neville and I believe are standards. We review the literature and other principles, standards, and related frameworks, and we distill them down to 6 that we believe pretty fully address the challenges in a clear and we believe manageable way. And I'll go over a few of these in a bit, but what you'll see on the website are sections like these: what each standard means, why the standard is important, and then the next 2 are, of course, incredibly important, and why this is a toolkit and not simply a paper or a book. That is to say, steps for achieving the standard and resources and tools that you may use. The final sections of the toolkit look at examples, how WING's members are promoting transparency and accountability, and then also offers some additional reading. So first, let's pause and just make sure that all of us understand what we mean by transparency and accountability, and that we're on the same page where that's concerned. And this is meant to make sure that you have a tool that will indeed allow you to make these definitions clear to your members. So the definition of accountability that we are using is this: an obligation or voluntary willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions and to explain and justify those actions to others. Now, this is important to, well, let me just say, an obligation refers to something that an organization must do because of enforceable rules or laws. Now, some of these might be internal to the organization, such as bylaws, while some are external to the organization, like government-enforced laws and regulations. Now, a voluntary willingness is a bit different. That obviously is something that an organization is not legally obliged to undertake, but which it voluntarily chooses to do so. So, for example, a foundation may not be legally obliged to create a website or publish an annual report, but it may voluntarily choose to do so as a matter of good practice. We believe this sort of distinction between obligation and voluntary willingness is very important. Most foundations will do what they are obliged to do. The tricky part is the voluntary willingness, those things which they are not forced to do, but ought to do as a matter of good practice. So a few important things to note with this definition, we believe: both the fact that there's obligation and a voluntary willingness, but there's more. We like this definition too because it implies that actions will be taken. The first action is that there's an acceptance of responsibility for one's actions, and also that there's a necessity to explain and justify those actions to others. That's what we believe is a somewhat complex, but a very complete and very good definition of accountability. I want to turn now to our definition of transparency. The definition of transparency we're using is the state of being transparent, meaning these things: characterized by visibility or accessibility of information, especially concerning organizational practices. But there is more to this. The information that is presented must be readily understood, and it must be free from pretense or deceit. Again, I think that most people tend to think of the first part when they think of transparency, but we believe these other elements of it, the fact that it must be readily understood and that it must be free from pretense or deceit, are equally important. So let's pause now, and we'd like you to think a little bit about the context in the own country or region where you are operating. So based on the definitions of transparency and accountability that we've just presented and that you'll see in the toolkit, How transparent and accountable would you say foundations and private social investors are in the country where your organization is located? And we'd like you to use a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being extremely transparent and accountable, and 1 being not at all accountable and transparent. So, Anna, if you'd like to run the survey now. And we'll give you 30 seconds or 40 seconds to vote on this.
Sure, that's already on. So you guys can click on, well, whichever number is more according to the scale of transparency and accountability of foundations in your countries. Again, 5, they are extremely transparent, and 1, they're not transparent at all. You can just click on the number and then on submit.
Let's give that another 15 or 20 seconds so we can move along.
Oh. And thanks everyone for participating in our poll, and you see the results shortly. And we're processing the responses right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I would like to see, but I fear what I will see. Great. So it looks like 17 of our participants called. And nice to see that relatively few of you believe that your sectors are not at all accountable. It looks like the biggest number we're seeing here is sort of the middle range, so 3 and 4. And no one believes that their sectors are extremely accountable. So I think that actually is for reason for optimism for all of us, certainly for those who voted in the 3 and 4 range. That is to say, there is some recognition of the importance of this, and yet there is some work to be done. So thank you for participating in that. And I'll return now to the toolkit and our ideas about this. Now, Carolina, in her presentation on Colombia, already shared some of these, but I'd like to say a little bit about what we have put in the toolkit as to why they matter. The work of foundations and social investors certainly involves a large number of stakeholders, people, organizations, and other entities that are involved in the operations of the philanthropic undertaking, or that are in some way impacted by its activities. We hope that this is in a positive way, but as all of us know, this is not always the case. It's important for us, we believe, to understand who our stakeholders are and take measures to address their concerns. So we have a set of stakeholders who are internal to the organization. So the organization's founder or founders. For private foundations, the organization's donors, board of directors, and staff. There may be a few others, but these are the main stakeholders. External stakeholders are many. For publicly supported foundations, donors, grantees, and other direct recipients of funding support, etc., beneficiary communities, the public government, and the environment as well. Now, at their best, foundations and social investors try to be as accountable as possible to all of these stakeholders. However, it's simply impossible to be fully accountable to all stakeholders at all times. There are conflicts of interest between the individuals and institutions on this list. Different stakeholders have different interests and priorities. So to be accountable to everyone in equal measure at all times would put the organization in an impossible position. So the toolkit includes additional information to help your organization try to find a way to prioritize these many diverse stakeholders so that when you're asking to whom you are accountable and transparent, you have a very clear idea of what that is. We don't have time to go into those specific tools. I invite you to look at the toolkit when you have a chance. Now, again, Carolina talked about this. Why do transparency and accountability matter? Now, certainly they are in and of themselves very worthy goals, but there are many tangible reasons why philanthropy and social investment should practice accountability and transparency. There's strong evidence that accountability and transparency lead to greater effectiveness, for example. Where foundations and social investors are respected and appreciated, they are more able to operate without fear of negative public and media attention or unwarranted government scrutiny. Now, our toolkit describes 10 compelling reasons for accountability and transparency. And I'll go over just 5 of these right now quickly. So one is trust, appreciation, and respect, and we've talked about this already. In many parts of the world, philanthropy and social investment are not well understood, especially where foundations are new and emerging. A large part of the population has little, if any, understanding of what foundations do and how they operate. And of course, this lack of understanding, as many of you know, can lead to suspicion and mistrust, but also a lack of appreciation for the value of philanthropy and social investment and the positive role that it can play. So certainly for reasons of trust, appreciation, and respect, greater transparency and accountability are important. A second reason is regulation. While in some parts of the world, as we know, civil society is warmly embraced and supported by governments, elsewhere there certainly has been a trend in clamping down on civil society, including philanthropy. Now, I wouldn't want to say that greater transparency and accountability would guarantee that governments would fully embrace the sector. But we believe that by practicing accountability and transparency and that demonstrating that operations are legal, legitimate, and positive for society, we can help ensure that regulations guiding the sector put in place are as limited and as reasonable as possible. Another possibility for some of you is resource mobilization. Certainly a large part of the growth of foundations in emerging markets and other countries has been the form of community and other publicly supported foundations. And potential donors to these foundations have a right, we believe, to a high degree of accountability and transparency, and indeed they often demand it. So the more public foundations practice these values, we believe the better chance they will have of attracting resources to do their work. Local ownership. This one is so very essential, and we spend a lot of time on this, in fact, on the website. Time and time again, it's been demonstrated that without local ownership, knowledge, experience, development efforts simply will not succeed. Local ownership will only occur where the public is given the information it needs to understand the change initiatives and to be able to play a meaningful leadership role in bringing them about. And for this knowledge to be gained and for the community participation to be authentic, foundations and their grantee partners must be accountable and transparent. A fifth is shared learning and scale. This perhaps isn't as familiar to some of you, but we believe it's very true. Every single day, foundations are learning important lessons about what works and what doesn't. And when we are transparent about that, we can share those lessons more easily and we can disseminate them more easily. Thus, we can attempt to speed up the pace of positive change, and not necessarily within just a given geographic region, but also across the globe as lessons in, say, Bulgaria are shared with India. I could have chosen any 2 countries. Let's take a little break from my talk and ask another survey question. So I have given you five possibilities. Which of these that I've given you do you believe foundations and social investors working in your country would find most important? What's your experience on that? What do you think resonates most? And your choices are these. trust and appreciation, respect, regulation, resource mobilization, local ownership, and sharing, learning, and scale. So, Anna, I'll turn it over for you as we run this survey question.
Well, thanks, John. You all can see the options you have here. And again, just click on the option and submit your answer to which of the 5 reasons you think is most compelling for transparency and accountability in your context. Trust, appreciation, and respect, regulation, resource mobilization, local ownership, or shared learning and scale. We're getting a few responses, so we'll get a few seconds left. Oh, great. And I guess you can all see the results.
Great. So, looks like trust, appreciation, and respect are important. Regulation, resource mobilization. I hope I'm not alone in being really disappointed at local ownership at coming in at 0. I hope that all of us understand that part of our accountability and transparency is essential. Perhaps this indicates to us where a lot of the work needs to be done in the discussions that we have in our sectors and with our members. So I'd like to move on then again, if Anna, if you could hand me over the control. Great. So, as I said, we present 6 standards for transparency and accountability. And let me say just quickly, of course, there's no single formula for becoming an accountable and transparent philanthropy or social investor. No 2 organizations are exactly the same. However, we believe that there are 6 basic and essential standards on accountability and transparency that are common to all foundations and private social investors. And these are as follows. The 6 standards we present are clarity and alignment of mission and programs, commitment to grantees and the communities they serve, sector engagement and collaboration, open communication, and that really gets at the core of transparency, compliance with laws and regulations, and finally, internal practices that foster accountable action. We, of course, won't have time today to go over these, but let me just go over a few, and I'm looking at the time and realizing that we are running out of it. So I'm going to move very quickly and perhaps do a little skipping around. So let's talk about number 2, again, because it poured so squarely on local ownership, I'm glad that I selected this. So what we talk about in the toolkit is, first of all, what this means. We talk about why this is important to accountability and transparency. And then, all importantly, we offer steps for achieving this standard, and we try to be as systematic in this as possible. So here are the steps we outline. Number 1, develop a board-approved document outlining accountability and transparency policies and procedures. It's not enough simply to say this. The only way that things get done in our institutions if we have formal policies and procedures. Second is considering how grantees and communities can be directly involved in our work, and this is really core. And there are many ways that we present. There might be learning and reflection events involving beneficiary community members. There may be learning and reflection events involving grantees. There could be advisory committees comprising grantees. There could be the idea of including grantees or community members on your board. And even increasingly popular, the idea of evaluation of your organization from the perspective of grantees. Many ways to do this. These are just a few that we've named. Clearly, we need easy-to-follow application processes. Engaging in site visits can be an important approach. Developing evaluation protocols that are done in partnership with grantees. And then considering making general support grants whenever possible. We hear this a lot. It's always worth stressing. It's very important that staff have the capacity on community engagement. Not everybody has the personality for this. Not everybody has a natural disposition for it. So it's important to invest in the staff being able to engage in this way. And then finally, we also have to budget for community engagement. It can be, it can cost money to do site visits. It can cost money to have public events and community consultations, things like this. And we have to be sure that we take care of that. Again, there's so much more on the website, on the toolkit. I won't go into it now, but you'll see the kinds of things that we get at. Following the steps for achieving the standard, we offer tools and resources for that. I'm going to skip over this. Well, actually, I won't skip over it. I just want to say one thing. So Standard 4 is around open communication, and this, of course, is around transparency. Again, we talk about what it means, why it's important, but I also want to note this. We offer a cautionary note of transparency. Of course, it's possible that we don't want to reveal everything about ourselves. Some foundations, for example, work on very sensitive issues such as human rights, domestic violence, and other topics. Such organizations have to think carefully about what the information they make public and ensure that the information that they make public does not put any individual organization in harm's way. There are other reasons, other cautionary notes on transparency, and we discuss those in the toolkit. Then we offer steps for achieving the standard, and I'll just flash through these quickly. Create and implement a board-approved transparency policy, the website, an annual report, print versions of grant guidelines for those who don't have internet access, and then periodic events to the general public. And again, it's always very useful to have outside information, or rather information on the organization reviewed by outsiders. Let me move quickly then to the third that I'll review, and that's internal practices that foster accountability and transparency. And this is, I think, very, very important. Now, stated values, stated aspirations, stated commitments, these are very important to advancing accountability and transparency, of course, but they are by no means sufficient. To truly put accountability and transparency into practice, more is needed. And we think that there are three factors that interact particularly to support or prevent accountable and transparent action across different organizations. The first would be the practices, and these are activities and interactions between an organization and its stakeholders. A second element is the culture. What's the culture within the organization? And what are the attitudes, the values, the beliefs of staff and the board that foster transparency and accountability? And thirdly, rules. By this we mean the policies, the procedures, and other mechanisms that promote transparency and accountability. Now, again, this section has why it's important, stakeholders involved, those kinds of things, but let me just sample for you a couple of the tools that we present. We have a sample whistleblower policy, and we have sample employee handbook language that work to stress the importance of accountability and transparency and offer staff means to being that way. So I've gone very quickly through this. I wish I could have had 3 hours with you. I don't. Check out the website. We'll have a chance to talk about this, but now let me turn it over to examples from WING's members.
Oh, thank you very much, John. So we can pass it over to Natasha, that will be unmuted now, and so she could talk a little bit about the EFC's experience with transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Anna. So thank you for WING for the opportunity to take part in this discussion. EFC is very pleased to do so. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to talk through 3 short points, and these are the tools that the EFC has been using for quite some time in terms of working with our members on transparency and accountability. And then secondly, to take a short look at one specific such tool, which is the EFC and Council on Foundations Principles of Accountability and International Philanthropy, for international philanthropy, so the what, how, and why of those. And then just briefly looking forward and at what's on the agenda for us right now in terms of transparency and accountability. So obviously as an association of foundations and corporate funders, transparency and accountability is very much at the heart of what the ESC is doing with and for its members. And some core tools and processes that we've been using in that regard are, of course, our own principles of good practice. So these are the fundamental principles to which ESC members agree to adhere when they join the ESC. And these are regularly reviewed and revised by the membership itself. The last time that was done was in 2014, last year. Also, the ESC and Council on Foundations Principles of Accountability and International Philanthropy, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Then, of course, we have a range of outreach and program activities. So through knowledge sharing and convening, we know that associations are playing a key role in raising awareness and providing practical support to funders when it comes to transparency and accountability. And of course, underpinning, we hope, all the conversations around transparency and accountability is research and having an understanding of the landscape as a starting point for the conversations. And one concrete example of where we've been active there is a study from a few years ago on exploring transparency and accountability regulation of foundations, which was looking both at the laws and also at a range of self-regulatory tools across Europe, and that was done in partnership with Daphne, the Donors and Foundations Networks in Europe. So turning then to the EFC and Council on Foundations Principles of Accountability in International Philanthropy. An outline of those principles is set out in the WING's Transparency and Accountability Toolkit, so I won't go over the details of that now. The principles, as I think has already been mentioned, were developed by a joint working group with the Council on Foundations and the ESC, and were published in 2007. The development of those principles was very much a consultative process. So meetings were held with different sets of stakeholders across all different regions of the world: Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe. And in addition to the 7 principles themselves, there's practice options and theoretical examples of both good practices and hurdles that might be encountered in international philanthropy. And I suppose the key question is, why a specific set of principles looking at accountability in international philanthropy? And the rationale was that at the time that these principles were developed, it was becoming very clear that foundations face specific challenges when working in an international foreign context. And this ranges, of course, from practical issues like language differences or differences in legal and accounting practices, but also more subtle or less tangible differences, cultural differences, varying values, perspectives, expectations and capacities, and also diverse political contexts and different sets of power dynamics. The principles were designed not as something to sign up to or as a specific checklist, but as an inspirational tool, and they very much take cognizance of the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. The aim is to suit a range of audiences, so the idea was both to stimulate reflection by those already deeply engaged in international work, to help them perhaps take a fresh, critical look at what they're doing, and also to support newcomers to that field in thinking around how to build in mechanisms of accountability into their international work from the start. So the principles reflect on foundations working internationally as being accountable to a range of stakeholders, and these include the foundation's mission itself, the grantees, its partners, and of course ultimately the intended beneficiaries of the philanthropic activities. And these principles very much encourage funders to take a holistic approach to considering their work as part of a much bigger picture, both in terms of the rest of that foundation's work at home and abroad, but also in the context of what other actors are doing. And then moving on just to my third point about looking forward and what's coming up for us at the moment. So the EFC is, of course, continuing in working with our members on exploring foundations' own practices and operations, and supporting foundations to share good practices and challenges and to learn from one another. So professional development activities are core to this. During the last year, we've had a number of workshops and events looking at the practice around grant making and the tools for learning from your partners and grantees and building these opportunities into your project planning. And more coming up is the issue which John mentioned of communication. So this year's European Learning Lab, which is taking place in September and in June, will explore good practices in using communication strategically to advance the Foundation's mission, and a core part of that is communication as a vehicle for transparency and in delivering impact and effectiveness. In terms of policy making and the regulatory environment, the EFC is continuing very much to engage around the regulatory environment for philanthropy. Protecting and promoting a good operating environment is core to our mission. Increasingly, there is a trend for growing restrictions on the operating environment for philanthropy, so tightened transparency and accountability rules for foundations. And a key driver of that can be identified at the moment as the Financial Action Task Force, which has issued special recommendations to governments on how they should be making sure that non-profit organizations are not abused for terrorist financing purposes. The EFC has been very concerned that these recommendations, which are being implemented in 180 countries around the world, are being used as a basis for over-regulation of the non-profit sector in some cases. So there may be a misinterpretation or misappropriation of the recommendations that are being given. And in this regard, we're partnering in a project with the European Centre for Not-for-Profit Law and the Human Security Collective. And the core objectives of that project are to raise awareness among the non-profit sector of these recommendations and their implications, to strengthen the evidence base and push for reform and better implementation of the FATF measures, and also to ensure that the voice of the non-profit sector is heard through a structured dialogue with the Financial Action Task Force. And again, in terms of the bigger picture, the EFC is now developing a stream of work thinking about the wider societal trends around transparency. So things from the digital revolution to the increasing calls from the general public for greater transparency from both public and private institutions. We want to explore with our members the implications of these trends for foundations, and also look at the role that foundations can and are playing in advancing transparency in society through their programs or funding. And one final point, just to flag an event that we have upcoming about transparency that I hope will be of interest to some of you, which is called Who Owns the Transparency Agenda? And this will be a multi-stakeholder exchange on who's driving that agenda and why. And this will be taking place in Brussels on the 22nd of April. But of course, for those who can't be in Brussels, if you are interested, please contact us and we can share relevant materials with you after the event. So,
and thank you very much, Natasha. That's really interesting, and we're looking forward to seeing the outcomes of this event. It does sound like to be a very interesting one to follow up on the toolkits and the webinar. Iara, we're kind of running out of time, so finish Iara's presentation, and if you have any questions to our presenters, and you can stick around for a little bit, just write down your questions on the chat, and if we don't have time to answer them, we can just email the answers back to you. And Iara?
Hi, Anna. Hi, everyone. Thank you a lot for the invitation to talk to you today. I also try to be as quick as possible, and it's very good to just talk after all of you and hear all your experience. Well, I'm Iara, and I work at the GIFE knowledge area. For those who doesn't know, GIFE is a group of institutes, foundations, and corporations which brings together organizations that invest in public purpose through private social investment. Well, in Brazil, transparency, it's a known, well-developed culture, not really, following the growing interest on the national agenda, in the national agenda, with important examples such as the creation of the law of access to information and anti-corruption agenda, among other accountability initiatives. More and more transparency is being converting into value in private social investment sector. At GIFE, this issue has always been present. In 2010, when GIFE built his vision of 10 years, 3 essential aspects of private social investments were identified: relevance, diversity, and scope. and transparency was considered one of the pillars of relevance. That is because transparent practices are intrinsically linked to the relationship with society, to visibility, to presentation of results, and to the dialogue about relevant issues. And with the commitment to elevate transparency and legitimacy standards in the social sector, in 2012, GIFE published the principles of its initiative for transparency and accountability, initiated in 2011. Oh, you were asking something here? Said no. Although the focus were initially was its members, GIFE expects to go beyond its own network and be a reference to any social organization concerned about good government practices. We see accountability as a wise and essential step to strengthen civil society organization, and we also believe that in this era where the climate of suspicion prevails, transparency could be the greatest differential of serious organization. The credibility is most valued asset. Well, last year we have made a partnership with Foundation Senior in the United States to translate a specific number of the Grantcraft series, Open Up, Systematizing Funder Institute Transparency, quite referenced by the Toolkit, which is one of the most attacked publications of our knowledge center, so it means something. The translation was followed by a series of communication actions at social media with videos and infographics, and one of them I'm going to show you, both in Portuguese and English, to explore this context in different ways. We also did a launch event of the publication with the presence of a lot of our members and partners, and all this produced material is available at our website. Well, understanding that transparency is an essential theme for the whole society, we recently made an online debate about this, and it was a very interesting debate. And among the issues explored, we highlight, for example, how to extend the understanding about transparency in addition to its financial aspect. In what extent private institutions with public proposals still see themselves and are considered as free from the need of accountability when compared to the public institutions, and how transparency is widespread when it comes to review success, and how there is just a very little work at the moment to review failures of the organization. From the research perspective, conducting GIFE census every 2 years has also been a central activity of the production of knowledge on the field in Brazil. Through the census, we can better understand the ways that institutes and foundations can be communicating with society through disclosure of their data. The census collects data on auditing, financial statements, and reports publication, and we clearly observe that the topic has been growing among our associates, but there is still a gap between what is reported and what actually can be found on the website. Well, this is some of the infographics that we made based on the Grantcraft publication. They're all there is much more than this, but you can find it on the website. Okay, so we interpret this gap between theory and practice, observing that the culture of transparency is a very widespread here, for example, but the practices are not well applied. And seeking to approximate the practices with the theory. This year, we are developing one of the largest transparency projects at GIFE, the Transparency Panel, I think it's a similar project as Carolina was describing. This is an unprecedented initiative in the country which advocates transparency among Brazilian social investors, establishing at the same time conceptual, referential, and concrete practices of transparency of private organizations with public proposals. It will be an online tool that offers information, data sources, examples, and step-by-step instructions to guide actions that may make their practices more transparent. With it, we seek to disseminate the value of transparency at the private social investment sector and allow direct access to the practices of transparency and accountability. The panel idea, which probably is going to be finished by the end of the year, it is inspired by the pioneer experience of the Glass Pocket, the Foundation Center project. And we certainly use the material of the Toolkit as a very important reference to build it. In addition to all these actions, we also have a very strong focus on communication, understanding as a mechanism of transparency as well. More effective communication action has opened our institution, including its objectives, its form of performance, and contribution to the private social investment. This year, GIFE is turning 20, and we are very happy to celebrate this date with this initiative that aim to enlarge the legitimacy of this sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Iara. We already got a compliment on GIFE infographics, and I just want to make a point that we're going to share the presentations and the infographics with all of you and after the webinar. John, we have a question, if that's okay with you, from Nick from Lot. Is there any kind of addressing of the limits of transparency and accountability in the why section where too much transparency may be counterproductive, for instance?
To that issue, there's a section on transparency on the open communication section, and we try to address the sensitivities that we've described. And one of the tools in that section is a list of different items which a foundation or private social investor might make public. We suggest where those might be made public, and on that list we note where caution is necessary. So we do try to address it, but Nick and others certainly, if you feel that the toolkit could use more in this regard, do let Wings know. We understand this is a very important and sensitive issue, and we want to make sure that we don't make any mistakes with that. I see another.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Yes, thanks, John. Sorry, because there's another question that's from Adrian from AGN. And to what extent may governance structures, for instance, boards, share and communicate internal decisions from the open communication point of view?
Well, I think that each institution needs to make up its own mind about that. I think that the spirit should be to be as open as possible, especially for publicly supported foundations, but not exclusively. But of course, as you're reviewing, you might find information that actually, for some reason, is perhaps not viable to be made public. There are many important things that go on behind the scenes at institutions, and they do need to be kept private, proprietary to the board. I would highlight the work that AFE did in Colombia, and I'm very much looking forward to the making public of the very full transparency list that they made. I think that will cover some of these issues that both Adair and Nick have raised. where does one draw the line on this? Again, if you feel the toolkit could use more on this, then I think Wings would be very happy to hear that.
And thank you, John. And there's just there was a very interesting question from Nick about that we separated the definitions of transparency and accountability, which is very important. But then afterwards, they're treated together again, and that was a discussion we've had throughout the process and how to treat the terms. And since it was more and from a point of view to make it easier throughout the toolkit to use the terms together, but to make sure we understand them separately. But then that's the topic we should discuss in the future, and to be included in the toolkit, as John said, any suggestions that you may have, we should incorporate them into the toolkit in our learning process. And we have a last question from Adern, and again from AGN, John. That from AGN learning activities, they raised questions on the role of monitoring in transparency and accountability. So which role do you think it plays, does monitoring play in transparency and accountability?
Well, I think by monitoring, Adern would be referring to things like site visits, the ongoing communication that foundations would have with their grantees and beneficiaries. I think that it plays an extremely important role in all of this, provided that it is a mutual experience. I guess I realize that foundations have to monitor their work. Coming from the United States, where our government is spying on everyone currently, I'm a little sensitive to that notion of monitoring. I'd rather it be considered sort of a discourse between the partners in the relationship around what's going on within the foundation, what's going on within the grantee, what's going on with the beneficiaries. And so for me, it's more sort of open communication, monitoring going both ways, which then can lead to, well, of course, that then is itself a very transparent behavior, but hopefully that then will lead to much greater accountability, accountability of the grantees to their funders and the obligations that they have, and accountability of the funders towards their grantees and the communities they serve.
And thank you very much, John, and thank you everyone for sticking around with us.